Hey everybody, welcome back to The Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini, your host, as always, and I'm joined by TheOnlyColors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey. We're here to talk about the latest in Michigan State sports, and Joe, for the first time in 364 days, for the first time ever on this podcast, I think, we have a football loss to talk about. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. After what was kind of a brutal Saturday night, I think I've emotionally recovered. So there's that.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll start talking about football here. We'll talk about the game, talk about playoffs, Maryland, and we'll finish up with some basketball. But as we look back at this game, I mean, there's so many things you can point to. The 39-38 final score. I mean, where do you want to start with this game? Do you want to start with the non-call at the end? Do you want to start there, or do you want to start somewhere else?
We can start there, I guess. I mean, I think it's as good a place as any. And yeah, I mean, I think.
What'd you think of that?
Well, so they got the call wrong. I think, right? So what's funny is that after the Big Ten reviewed it, they said that they went through the correct process, and that's the way that it needed to be ruled. Once they ruled it was a force out on the field, because that's a judgment call that is not reviewable. So they screwed that up, right? I mean, the receiver definitely went out of bounds on his own. The funny thing though is that it seems to me the spirit of the rule wasn't exactly violated there, right? I mean, yes, the receiver ran out of bounds a little bit, but it's not like he gained a major advantage by going out of bounds anyways.
I think you did I think you got an advantage if the defensive back as a boundary. I mean,
do you think that the defensive back knew where the sideline was in that situation? Because I don't think that Edmondson knew where the sideline was. I think he was just kind of running with him.
I think he kind of angled. I think he knew his role is to body the receiver between himself and the sideline, and he did. And I think if the receiver doesn't go out, I don't really think it was offensive pass interference getting back in, but Edmondson kind of got a little turned around there. If the receiver stays with them and they're kind of bodied, I think it's a different play. I do think Edmondson thought he had a boundary there. He kind of just, I think, fell or kind of underplayed the ball or overplayed the ball a little bit. I don't know. Everybody except the official thought it wouldn't count. Like Mike Riley didn't think it would count. He said they were working on the next play. The Nebraska radio guys didn't think it would count. The only people who thought it would count were the officials. Now, then again, the officials had a different view than almost anybody else. So maybe the coaches had, Nebraska coaches had that view. But, I don't think it was a good call. I don't think anybody really thinks it was a good call. But, it kind of it happens. It's
and it shouldn't have gotten to that situation, right? That's the biggest thing to me, like you said. Yeah, there's a lot of different things you could point to.
Yeah, we'll move to that. But on this play itself, I mean, I think that's the reason the rule exists. So cornerbacks know that they have a boundary to work with, and it's. I mean, the receiver obviously wasn't running 5 yards out of bounds to try to gain an edge, but I do think in the heat of moving, Edmondson's taught to, stay right there with his guy, and the sideline is to his advantage, to the cornerback's advantage on that play. And I think he was using it as such, and misplayed the ball when it came back in. But I think it was a bad non-call. Now, whether or not they can review it, based on what I had read and heard, they can only review it basically if there was any contact at all. They cannot review it, which seems weird in the idea you can only review it, because then I don't know what you're reviewing. Like if it had been determined that there was no contact, they could review to make sure there was no contact. I don't know. That part of the rule kind of confused me. But
and I think they were also reviewing to make sure that
he had got him
he
bounds.
reestablished himself in bounds before
Right.
kicking the ball.
And another thing, the officials should have made that clear because they just said the play is under review. As far as I remember, they didn't say, we will review to determine if he was in, or even when they announced it, I think they just said it stood. Did they say he came back in, established himself? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I think that they said something along those lines, though.
But anyway, it comes back to Miami Duke a week ago, where that was a 9-minute review, and they didn't know what the hell they were reviewing because they had said no knee was down, no, the play's still under review, so no one knew what was going on. They didn't even tell the coaches what happened. I think that with replay, there has to be just better communication on what's going on. The same thing happened in the Indiana game a couple weeks ago when they were reviewing maybe forward progress or maybe if he stepped out. I don't think they ever explained that either. So I think they need to kind of better communicate on that because I think a lot of people thought they were reviewing if he was pushed out or not because you kind of can review that, I guess. It sounds like it's just very unclear and it's kind of very ambiguous. My overall take, it was a bad non-call, and everybody seems to agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But, as we said, game could have ended plenty of times before then. What's the next part of this game you want to talk about? Because we got a lot of things, a lot of different parts of it we can talk about.
Well...
you want to go with the defense? You want to go with the final offensive series? Do you want to go with the beginning of the game, the whole game in general?
Well, want to is an interesting way to describe that. Let's talk about the final series of play calling on the second to last. Well, okay, no, let's go in reverse order. So let's start actually later in the game than even that call, which was then the kickoff, the one pass downfield, and then the throw that kind of went out of bounds a second too late to even get a long field goal attempt off.
Right.
I thought that the play call, whatever it was on that very final play of the game, Cook needed to know that he needed to get the ball out one way or another, whether, that involved just kind of taking a knee more or less and taking a timeout, although really any loss of yardage at that point is pretty disastrous to a field goal attempt.
But they had a timeout left, I believe, right?
Yeah, they still had timeout. Okay. So that's the thing. They needed to get the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. From where it was prior to that snap, I believe it would have been like a 57 or 58-yard field goal, which is really stretching it. But my thought on that final play was that what they should have done was run a draw play. They very rarely do that to begin with, and I think it would have been effective. And once you get the ball in somebody's hands, if he picks up 5 to 7 yards and all of a sudden it's a 50-yard field goal, that's a pretty reasonable try for Geiger, who's pretty good from distance at times. So to me, it seemed like that was sort of that very final play was a little bit of a disaster in and of itself. Though again, it should not have gotten that far. I don't know if you had any other take on that final sequence or not, but
yeah, I don't know if a draw would have worked just simply because of how poorly they had run all day. But I think it was just kind of with the last play where Cook threw it out of bounds too late. I think it was just just unfortunate how it played out. It looked to me like Cook was gonna throw, and then he kind of got hit and pulled back. I don't know if he was pump faking. I don't know if he was gonna throw it or not. But he goes back and he kind of goes to throw, and he gets hit and stops, and then he kind of turns and throws it away. It was, it would have been better for him to just go down because you have the timeout there, obviously. But he knew to throw the ball away too. But I think it was just an unfortunate, sort of like just a bad thing that kind of happened. When you look at the Michigan punt that the guy fumbled. Yeah, you tell the guy to just land on it. But all the coaches I've talked to here say you don't tell your guy right there, if you drop it, land on it, because then he's only going to think about dropping the snap. Cook knows to get the ball out of bounds. It was just a little too late. And it was kind of funny with it happening at Nebraska, with Nebraska having a similar situation against Texas.
Yeah.
Well, if Cook shortens that throw, or if he lowers that throw and it hits somebody on the sideline with the second left, who knows? They had a chance. That's the thing. That's the other thing. They got down in position where they would have had a chance to win the game, and to kind of lose it on that, it's kind of like the basketball loss to Michigan on the turnover when Trey Burke stole.
Come on, Chris, why you got to bring that up?
Where it's like, well, you got a chance, and then you don't even really get to use your chance. Like, it just kind of I just think it was an unfortunate. Cook knew what he was doing. He's a senior QB. He got hit. He kind of got bumped. He tried to make the play. If you look back, you tell him either just go down or whatever, or I'm not going to really put any blame on him. I mean, I guess I won't put a ton of blame on him, because he did try to make the right play, throw it away. It just kind of didn't work out. So just kind of a bad sequence.
So speaking of bad sequences, we should probably go back then to the 3-and-out on the drive, the MSU offensive drive prior to that, which I thought the third down tight end around was a really unnecessarily conservative play call, and I think that a lot of people felt that same way. I mean, I understood running the ball on both first and second down in that situation to make Nebraska use both of their timeouts, and but the tight end around was really pretty brutal from a play call perspective, it seems like to me. And I'm not a guy who likes to criticize play calling very much either. I mean, I think that's a hard job, and when the plays happen to go well, you look like a great play caller, and when they go poorly, you look like a horrible play caller. But the process itself is kind of hard to pick out as the game goes along. But the tight end around was just way too conservative. I mean, you've got Connor Cook and Aaron Burbridge, who, when he is single covered, can basically catch over almost anybody. I would have liked to see a throw on that third down, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had said after the first down play that they should run a misdirection, because Nebraska's just waiting for a run in the pile. Try a misdirection, whether it's a counter, whether it's that fake fullback dive pitch that I don't think they've run since like Le'Veon Bell against Wisconsin in 2010. But I love that play. It started with the second down running into the pile, because they had not run well into the pile other than like the first play of the game when Holmes, but even that one I think was more off tackle. So I didn't like running into the pile on second down, because you knew it wasn't going to do anything. And then the third down, like that tight end. Okay, a couple things with this. For one, it's very clear that Jamal Lyles does not have speed. He is not
right.
He is not Kellen Davis out there when he was playing defensive end with athletic ability, with as much athletic ability. He was not turning that corner. So the player selection I didn't like. Two, the play itself, a tight end run. I wouldn't have hated it as much on second down because of what I said, because of the misdirection. D'Antonio said, we thought they weren't expecting that play. Well, there's a reason they weren't expecting that play, because even if it had fooled them, I mean, it somewhat fooled them, but he wasn't even close. It wasn't even. And then the whole other idea of third down, you got the best quarterback in the Big Ten, arguably. You got one of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best quarterbacks in school history. Put the game on him. He constantly bails you out of passing situations time and time again. On third down, he's completing almost 60% of his passes. He went 10 for 15 on third down against Indiana. Nebraska's not a good pass defense. He was already having a great day passing. I mean, what did he finished? 23 for 37, 335, and 4 TDs. You know, run that sideline fade. That's your go-to play with Burbridge. You figure they're gonna somewhat sell out for the run because they gotta prepare for that. You should have pretty good coverage if you try to do something in the passing game. Cook got you there. Cook, you weren't running the ball all day. Cook is the only reason you were in that position. He's by far the biggest reason you were in contention for a national championship. Put the game on him. It wasn't fourth down. It wasn't like if you miss, they get the ball, right there. You still could punt it away. I really didn't like that. And it felt so un-D'Antonio-like because it's ever since that 2012 season, they played conservative against Nebraska and it cost them. Although I will say I could understand that in 2012 because you were putting the game on your defense, which was one of the best in the country. This ain't that defense. To play so conservative with that defense, the guy who fakes punts, the guy who goes for fourth downs, it just felt uncharacteristic of him from what we've seen over the past 3 years from this team, even the past 5 really. And I think everybody you had that sense that if they were going to try to put the game on the defense, it wasn't going to work. And to not give Cook that chance to win you the game, to choose your defense to win you the game instead of your quarterback, I just think was not good. They don't trust him enough. I don't know why. They haven't all year. That's why he's always bailing them out in passing downs and third downs. You got to let him rip it. They passed it 37 times compared to 34 runs, not sack adjusted. You got to open this up.
There were no sacks, so
okay.
It was a pretty even split. I mean, the other thing to think about is that from the yard line they were at, to me, it seemed like if you could get it to a 4th and 1 or 4th and 2 situation, it would have been worth going for it to end the game as well. So, I mean, as it turns out, I wonder if D'Antonio sort of had that in his mind as well when they first got the ball. Like, maybe it's 4-down territory if we get to a 4th and manageable. So maybe the thought there is we don't have to pick up all 8 yards on 3rd and 8. We can get, if we pick up 5 yards on 3rd and 8, we, feel pretty good about getting the final couple or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It was just too conservative, and I think that that's pretty much all there is to say about it. I think overall they've been a little predictable, but they've been that way for a long time in terms of the likelihood of running the ball on passing downs or passing the ball on standard downs. They just choose to pass the ball a lot in passing situations and run the ball a lot in non-passing situations.
And they've been in a lot of passing situations because those running downs have not worked. And it's just unfortunate how they don't appear to trust him enough to just let him loose. Make it a pass first deal. Use the pass to set up the run because the run wasn't working in this game. And
here's something that I wrote about in the 5 factors piece. The conservative play calling is an issue on a season level because this team has played a lot of close games against inferior competition, and I think it'd be hard for anyone to argue that Nebraska was not the inferior team in general in terms of quality, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens is if you end up running the ball a lot and running a relatively slow offense like MSU does, you end up with a game that has fewer possessions than it normally would. And MSU over the course of the year has been really slow in terms of number of possessions per game. I think that the largest number of possessions per game possessions in a particular game was 13. So compared to last year, I believe that MSU ended up with something like 17 drives in the game against Nebraska. And those, incremental 3 drives could be pretty significant. If your offense averages more points per drive than your opponent on average, you want to aggregate more possessions if you can. And so what has ended up happening is MSU plays a slow pace, and then the games turn out a lot closer than they should, partially because they're not giving their offense enough opportunity to really shine in terms of possessions. And what's interesting about this game is I was convinced that the possession number was going to be pretty high because Nebraska, over the course of their year, has been a fast-paced team. They throw the ball a lot. Tommy Armstrong Jr.'s coming into this game, I remember the stat was something like he had almost 5 more attempts per game than Connor Cook. And so they were playing fast. In the first half of this game, both teams had 7 possessions. So I kind of figured that it would be a even faster second half, because that's kind of typically how that goes in a relatively close game, which it was going into half. So that's why I tweeted out that I thought this would be the fastest game that MSU played this season in terms of number of possessions, and that didn't turn out to be true, partially because of the fourth quarter drive that lasted about 9 minutes. Now, on its face, you can't really argue with that 9-minute fourth quarter drive. It put MSU up by 2 scores with I forget exactly what the time was like, but it was like 5 or 6 minutes left. That's a hard one to argue with, but overall, I think that MSU, in terms of play calling, ends up playing a slower pace and playing not to their strengths in a way that has caused games to be close, and this is one that finally bit them. You play enough close games and you're bound to lose at least one of them. So
I think that's a good way of putting it, not playing to their strengths, or at least not accentuating them as much.
Right, and I don't think that the coaching staff would think about things like possession numbers, probably, right? I mean, that's kind of a weirdly abstract.
I would, because D'Antonio he's the kind of coach who still talks about time of possession, so he still seems to be the guy who wants to grind it out in a slow death type of deal. But last year they said
that's unfortunate because time of possession is a meaningless stat. But
right, last year they set every offensive record in the book, and a big part of that was because Jeremy Langford and they had a running game. They haven't been able to, partly because of offensive line, they haven't been able to really run the ball this year. So, you just wish with the quarterback that they have,
and the receiving core that they've got too. I mean, Aaron Burbridge has been incredible, and RJ Shelton had a fantastic catch late in the game as well. I mean, yeah.
Right.
It's unfortunate.
I mean, and a lot of people, because it's college football, people overreact and call for Dave Warner's job, which is ridiculous. Him and Jim Bollman have done a tremendous job over the last 3 years. It's just sometimes it gets predictable, and you gotta not be predictable. I mean, they have all the numbers. They know when they're running and whatnot, and why. I just think it's more of a philosophy thing and a desire to be a run first team when it's especially doesn't fit the personnel this year.
Yeah, and so I think the difference with Warner and Bollman compared to what was going on in, say, 2012 with Ruchar is that, to me, it seems like a tweak thing, right? It's being slightly less predictable in terms of play calling, and it's pretty minor. I think that they've done a pretty good job of designing passing packages that have gotten Burbridge and Cook and Shelton into situations where those will be successful. I mean, it's a
tremendous pass over the last 3 years. It's been they've come up with some awesome plays. I mean, the Pendleton play against Michigan, just
right.
I watched it a million times that I keep losing track of them. And Michigan ended up running basically the same play this week against Rutgers.
So yeah, I mean, I've been very happy with Warner and Bollman, and so yeah, I mean, we're criticizing, but I think overall it's pretty small potatoes, and yeah, on the day when you put up 39 points, the offense probably wasn't your main issue, and that's probably a pretty good segue into talking about the defense.
Yeah, you put up 38 points.
38 points, sorry.
30, and it could have been,
still in denial.
Before we move to the defense, I think speaking of being aggressive, the first series, they go for fourth down. The last series with the lead, they run, and they, that's what I'm talking about. It was just that last series was very on D'Antonio. Go back to that first series. Holmes should have easily picked up that first down on a third down play. He doesn't. Kind of dances. They go for the fourth down and get stopped, and that kind of really gets the crowd going. And you wonder how the game plays out differently if they score a touchdown on that first drive and get the momentum right off the bat, because Nebraska took the lead early and held the lead for quite a while until I think half or for half. So that's another thing with the offense.
I'm not a momentum believer, but I agree. I mean, they pick up that fourth down; it's helpful.
It's a crowd that they're 3-6. They're pissed off at their guys, and if you can just get them out of the game early, I think it helps. I know you're not really into that stuff, but I do think they got a boost from that stop.
Well, but Nebraska went down by 2 touchdowns with like 6 minutes left to go in the game, and at that point you would say that Nebraska had absolutely no momentum, and then that changed pretty quickly. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is sort of a tangential point, anyways.
Anyway, defense not good.
Yeah,
not good. 320 passing yards to Tommy Armstrong, who can only throw jump balls, and who you knew only could throw jump balls, and the defensive backs just could not stop it.
No sacks.
That didn't help.
That was, I think, to me, that was the biggest part of the final scoring drive, was that Armstrong had all day to throw the ball. I mean, the secondary obviously has issues. Yeah.
Even when they blitzed, they weren't getting much pressure. So I don't really know what the answer was there. I mean, Calhoun seemed to be getting pressure, but a couple times he got held. He seemed to be wanting a lot of calls that he wasn't getting. But yeah, I mean, when you can't get pressure, it's not going to help the DBs. But I don't think. They weren't these complex, passing schemes where receivers were losing their guys. Most of the time they were just getting just straight beat. Josh Butler was in there late, got beat on one. Edmondson was a mess. Cox was a mess. Calhoun did okay. He's become their best defensive back. Kari Willis was in there. Grayson Miller, Nicholson got in there. Just nothing from those guys. And
that's not even to mention that Monty Medeiros, the converted wide receiver, changed numbers and has been playing, and also Tyson Smith, the true freshman, got some run.
That's kind of where they're at, and we talked about it last week when Armstrong was good to go. That was a big deal because you knew they were just going to throw the jump balls because MSU can't defend them, and they didn't. And when you can't get pressure, that's accentuated even more.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution is. So on this week's depth chart for Maryland, they listed Nicholson and Kari Willis as co-starters at one of the safety spots, the one that is not occupied by Grayson Miller. And I don't know if that's a response to some of what was going on there or what the deal is. But yeah, in this game, I mean, there was not very much pressure on Tommy Armstrong, and then when there was, he was able to extend plays and make things happen. It was it was discouraging. But I mean, all of that told, even going into the very last drive, you gave up 90 yards in passing, 90 plus yards in passing on that final drive over 3 passing plays, right? If he doesn't have that final drive, then the stats look very different. Like everything about the game looks pretty significantly different. It's that final drive was really, really discouraging. But that's why, you can't necessarily this season put it on your defense to finish a game, even when it's a minute left and you put your opponent on the 5. But I don't know what else there is to say about the defense there.
That first play, they dropped 8 and still left a guy wide open. and then they decided to blitz on the next few plays, but they still couldn't cover anybody.
And Colhoun almost came down with that
And
interception in the end zone.
Colhoun did have the interception drop. That's another play there. That just so much in this game, just one thing different. A lot of things had to happen for it to lose, and
not to mention that Nebraska had to hit both of their field goals. Had Nebraska missed one of their 2 field goal attempts, it's also a different game.
although MSU did make a field goal.
Yeah, but
that was
they only attempted 1. It's a little different when you start to have multiple field goal attempts with a college kicker.
Yeah.
You'd think that, on average they wouldn't hit both, but
well, and you got MSU's Geiger hitting 50% almost on the year, and it was how long was it? It was a decent. It was 46 yards. So 46.
I thought it was 45.
That's pretty good. But another thing, we've been talking a lot about this game, but there's just so many things to talk about in this game. The kick return team, brutal again. Only no touchbacks out of 7 kickoffs. 1 of them went out of bounds. Nebraska averaged, let's see, what did they have in returns? They had a 34-yard return.
Well, not only were the returns good for Nebraska, but MSU was helping them out. There were 2 different returns where there was a 15-yard face mask penalty that gave Nebraska even better field position.
That whole second half, here's where Nebraska started in the fourth quarter. 9-yard line on the final drive. But before that, their own 47, their own 35, their own 41, the 31-28, then their own 39, their own 48. They were hitting 2 plays and they're in field goal position on these drives, and it just really hurt. It really affected. It puts the defense in a tough spot, and that kickoff coverage was just brutal, and it really, really cost them a lot of field position.
I think there were a couple things with field position. So Nebraska's average yard line, I think, was the 33 and change, and MSU's was the 30 or so. That's a relatively significant difference over the course of a game. But the other thing that was interesting was the first couple drives for MSU were 3 and outs, and Cook looked pretty shaky on those first couple drives.
3 for 8 passing, missed some guys high, missed an open Medeiros that could have been a TD.
Yeah, so I think on those that initial few drives, where there were 3 and outs and not much yardage gained, kind of gave Nebraska some early field position as well, even separate. But yeah, once it got into the second half, the kick return coverage then kind of took over, and yeah, despite the fact that there were no absolute disasters on special teams, actually Hartbarger had a nice punt at the end to pin Nebraska inside the 10 before that final drive. Special teams overall were still pretty negative on the day, and it's that part's just kind of depressing.
Yeah. But anything else you want to talk about this game?
No, I think that's all I got. Sorry if there's some noise. My roommate sounds like he's doing wrestling upstairs. But
I didn't hear nothing. So,
okay.
Maryland's not been very good this year, but they're actually coming off a performance in which they played Wisconsin pretty tough, lost by 7. First thing that jumps out to me about this game is the idea of them kicking off to Will Likely. What do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, special teams are going to be an adventure. Absolutely. I haven't spent a whole lot of time previewing Maryland here. I know that their quarterback situation is really poor. And so that's a positive. I think that's going to be one area where MSU might be able to kind of lick their wounds a little bit defensively against a team that can't really pass the ball very well. So that's a positive. I think so long as special teams are not a total disaster, that MSU should win this game pretty handily.
I would say that if they ever won any game handily, that's a problem. What is the line for this game?
That's a good question. I did not look that up.
I'm gonna look that up right now. Yeah, Maryland. I mean, they come in at. My computer's going slow here. I think they have. Who here? Come on, internet. Why are you going so slow? They come in at 2-7, with the wins over South Florida and Richmond. They have an interim coach. Their offense has been pretty brutal this year. Although in the last 3 games they scored 30 against Penn State and 24 against Wisconsin, so they seem to have kind of picked things up a little bit there. Don't really have much to say about this game. They've rotated a ton of quarterbacks. They've put Will Likely in at offensive times. Okay, Michigan State by 14.5.
That seems low.
Over under of 57.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, they played a pretty decent game against Penn State at home. They only lost by 1 to Penn State at home, and then they lost by a score against Wisconsin last week. But yeah, they're not very good at passing the ball. They're nearly dead last nationally in terms of passing success rate. They've been able to run the ball a little bit. They're top 15 nationally in rushing S&P plus. Although I don't know. They've got a couple guys who average more than 5 yards a carry, and their quarterback has over 500 yards rushing on the season. So, yeah, it seems to me like an offense that's sort of predicated on running the ball, which is a good matchup for MSU in that sense. And then, yeah, defensively, they haven't been great in any particular area. It doesn't seem like their footprint is fantastic in any particular category. So, yeah, to me, this seems like a game that MSU should win by more than 2 touchdowns, especially coming off of that loss. I would think that they would be pretty motivated.
I was going to say, do you think they come out aggressive, or do you think they kind of stick with what they do?
Well,
are they going to come out, guns blazing, pass and get down, just try to get up big early, or do you think they're going to kind of?
No, I think it'll be.
Like they have?
I think it'll be I don't think that they're going to change the pace of their play unless that's a true schematic change that they're going to make for the next couple games. No, D'Antonio, is the kind of guy who is not going to change what he's going to do based on a loss like the loss to Nebraska, and that's definitely a positive, I think, for his coaching regime overall. I mean, that was one of the first things he talked about after the win against Michigan was things are never as good as you think they are, and they're never as bad as you think they are either. And I think he's pretty much spot on in that sense. So to answer your question, no, I think that they're gonna play their game. They're gonna try to run the ball. And I think we'll see a fair amount of Connor Cook. I don't know what the weather's supposed to look like on Saturday, but I kind of imagine that they're going to keep doing what they do, and I just can't imagine that. Maryland is not as good of a team as Nebraska. It's pretty clear to me. But.
No, they are not. You got to score.
A score prediction, or are you just saying that in general they have to score? So based on, I've predicted some pretty high scores, and I think it's probably just unlikely that MSU is going to play a fast enough pace to get to some of those scores. So let's say 38-21 MSU.
I'll go 35-17. So we're pretty close.
Yeah.
But it'll be a game, I think, that'll be a little closer for a while until the end. So the MSU loses, obviously, and they fall down to number 14 in the college football playoff poll. They are one spot ahead of Michigan. Do you give them any chance? Do you give them any chance to make the playoff?
So to me, the question is, what sort of chance do you think that MSU has traveling to Columbus and getting a win
Correct.
in Horseshoe. And to me, the odds of that happening are pretty slim, especially given the state of the secondary at this point. Yeah, so I mean that's sort of the answer. Do you give MSU a 10% chance of beating Ohio State in the Horseshoe? That sounds about right to me. It sounds like to me it's probably about a 10 to 20% chance at this point, just given the state of the defense. And yeah, so to me that's about the chance that MSU has. I mean, there's some small chance that they lose to Maryland or they lose to Penn State. Penn State team that had a pretty fun game against Northwestern this past week, or then even if they did win those games, then you have to win a theoretical Big Ten championship game against what is almost certainly going to be Iowa. So yeah, I mean, I would. I think 538's projections have MSU as a 10% chance of making the college football playoff, and I think that's pretty spot on.
Yeah, the thing is with MSU losing to Nebraska and basically likely ending their playoff hopes, is that it was pretty clear. I think they're going to get rocked in Columbus in 2 weeks by JT Barrett. They just can't. Yeah. It'll be a shootout, but they just can't stop. I can't see how they're going to stop them. They barely stopped Ohio State last year. I think Ohio State only punted like once in that game last year. And although Ohio State doesn't have the same receivers, MSU doesn't have the same defensive backs.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, when you're getting beat deep by Brandon Riley from Nebraska.
Right. Nebraska doesn't have any good. They got Westerkamp, and he was working on a concussion for most of that game.
Yeah.
So yeah, their playoff hopes, they fizzled out earlier, but who knows? Maybe they go into Columbus with a different mindset. But I just don't see how that game's going to be much of anything. Which brings an interesting situation where if that happens, and if they lose to Ohio State, it will be Michigan and Ohio State for the Big Ten East Championship, which is I'm sure not what people were expecting earlier in the year, but and I imagine MSU fans will love that.
Oh God, that's going to be a disaster of a week on Twitter, isn't it?
Oh, I'm sure.
If that happens. Yeah.
Although I will say for Michigan, they got two sneaky tough games before then. They go to Indiana this weekend, and I'm very interested to see Nate Sudfeld against that pass defense, because that should be a really good matchup. And then they go to Penn State for a game. So it's not a night game, but it could be a 3:30, which would be like 3/4 of a night game. So Michigan's got some stuff to do before they get there first. But Ohio State the last few weeks now has really been kind of rolling. And although they struggled a bit against Minnesota with Cardale Jones, I think it's been pretty clear why JT Barrett was the guy and will be the guy moving forward. And he will have them rolling. Ezekiel Elliott's had 14 straight 100-yard games. He's rolling. So, yeah, I don't give him a shot. I mean, we'll talk more about, we'll talk more about Ohio State next week. But their playoff chances were they were there. You could talk about them, but I think realistically looking at it, you kind of figured things weren't going to go well for them in Columbus in 2 weeks anyway. So in order to win the Big Ten, you are going to have to win in Columbus either way, and that's still the case. They still control their own destiny in the Big Ten, and that's how they got to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, so especially after the initial rankings where MSU was pretty low in the rankings, it would have required pretty massive craziness elsewhere for a one-loss non-Big Ten champion MSU to sneak into the playoff anyways. And so that's what the loss to Nebraska really hurts you on, is that now there's absolutely no way a 2-loss MSU non-Big Ten champion is in the playoff. And so that to me is really what you lose with the loss to Nebraska. Yeah, there's just no margin for error. You got to win out now. And that was going to be unlikely either way. But yeah, it's
so
kind of is what it is.
Kind of
what could be funny. What could be funny is a 10-2 season that would be massively disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, you look at last year, Cotton Bowl, 11-2. You never know how things will turn out, but more. I mean, the bigger picture is this pass defense is just brutal, and next year they're going to lose Colhoun and I believe Edmondson, right? Edmondson Senior.
I believe he's a junior.
Okay, let me double check this. But
So there's two ways to think about that, though.
You lose. Well, right. You lose Williamson. Okay, you do get Edmondson back. You lose Williamson and you lose Colhoun, who Colhoun has turned out to be maybe their best corner left, considering Darian Hicks has been out with a concussion and being sick, and Deontay Colhoun's been out for the year. So on the other hand, Kari Wilson and Grayson Miller will be sophomores. Butler and Smith will be sophomores, although they probably won't have much playing time. Edmondson will be a senior. Nicholson will be a junior. Cox will be Copeland will be a sophomore. Cox will be a senior. You got a lot of bodies there now. You've developed some depth. Now you just got to. Will that become quality depth? We don't know. And I do think losing Darian Hicks has proved very costly because Copeland was only there for a game and a half. But when he played, which wasn't much, Hicks has looked like their best quarterback. And they don't trust anybody out there right now. And they were rotating guys in and out against Nebraska. They were just trying to find anything. And so you look forward to next year. You hope those guys make a step because right now it's hard for it to get much worse.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that those guys will improve over time to some degree, right? That's number one. Number two is that just getting guys back healthy will be something, right? Starting secondary of Copeland, Darian Hicks, Demetrius Cox at safety, and Miller or Kari Willis or Nicholson, right? One of those guys who has a lot of experience at that point, to me seems like a secondary that could be pretty solid. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. To be missing three of your top four guys and the other one being Nicholson, who's fallen off, just you're starting four guys who weren't, or three guys who weren't starting at the beginning of the year, and Cox is moving all over the place as they try and find something for him because he's playing corner and just is not comfortable out there, and just still no one. I keep talking about it, just no one plays physical out there. I don't get it. They don't try to jam anybody. It's just not. They're just not doing it. So I don't know what it is. So yeah, anything else on football? We'll talk a little bit about basketball here too.
Nope, that's all I got.
Yeah, so basketball, I did not watch either of the games because I don't have BTN Plus because BTN Plus is stupid. You went to the first game. Did you watch the second game?
No, but I did read the recap by our own Matt McIntyre, which was good and sort of, I mean, was pretty much and watched some highlights, and I think that pretty much gave me the same impression as what I saw in the first game, which is that this team is more or less kind of what I expected. It seemed like coming in to the year, Izzo was pretty excited about the offensive potential of this team, but concerned about this team defensively. And it's kind of hard to evaluate the defense in these preseason games just because you don't know exactly how much effort the team's putting in these preseason games, knowing that it's a preseason game. And also against teams that are pretty poor. The first game against Northern Michigan, I think Northern Michigan was a worse opponent than Ferris State just based on where they are in the GLIAC conference in D2. But the positive surprises are the freshmen, Deonta Davis, the big man, and Matt McQuaid, who played a little bit at point. In the second game, he had 8 assists and no turnovers, which is pretty impressive. And seems like he's got a skill set that'll be pretty useful kind of regardless of where he plays. It seems like he has some ability to create, but is also a shooter. And so I think he's going to be a useful player in the wing rotation. And Deonta Davis seems like a guy with a little bit of an edge on the inside, which is nice, given that Costello is not always that guy, and Schilling is still a guy with high upside, but you know, who knows exactly what you're going to get from Schilling at any given point. So yeah, it's been a positive. I mean, Valentine has been interesting in terms of some of the passing that he's trying to pull off, although he always does that anyways. And then Aaron Harris has been the transfer has been a little bit of a disappointment just from a shooting perspective. He has not shot the ball well in these 2 preseason games. I don't know if that'll matter, but it'll be interesting because there's so many wings on this team that that's a guy who could end up losing some playing time to guys like Matt McQuaid or potentially Marvin Clark when he comes back, if they play Clark on the wing a little bit more with Bess and Davis playing at power forward. So yeah, it's been kind of an interesting preseason, and we got our first regular season game on Friday.
Yeah, I can't speak too much about it. I haven't seen them play. You obviously have. I appreciate your analysis. And for the people who also haven't, there's good stuff on the site on theoldercolors.com, like he mentioned, of Matt's recap. Highly recommend you checking that out. So you kind of an idea before this game. So we're at the time we're recording this on Tuesday. It's a week until the Kansas game. Is that correct?
Yep, Champions Classic is on the 17th, which is a week from today.
So it's here. Basketball, I'm not ready for it at all. I have such a hard time at the beginning of basketball season when football's still going on. So I mean, I'll be watching the games, but or at least I'll try to be. So.
Well, what's funny too is that you play these 2 preseason games against 2 D2 schools. The game on Friday is against Florida Atlantic, who's a pretty bad D1 team. Then all of a sudden you play Kansas in the Champions Classic, who's a top 5 KenPom team preseason. Then you get a slew of Arkansas Pine Bluff, Eastern Michigan, and a Boston College team that isn't particularly good either. So, it's going to be other than the couple games against big non-con opponents. Louisville and Florida both come to the Breslin Center this year. Non-conference basketball is always a little bit of a slug anyways, just because there's so many bad opponents that you end up playing that sometimes you have no idea what you're actually learning from any of these games, right?
Right.
So it'll be fun. Big Ten should be a lot more wide open this season. So with several teams.
Although everybody picked Maryland to win. What do you think about that? I honestly, I'm going to admit I don't know much about the rest of the Big Ten basketball right now. I kind of get a feel for it as the year goes on, but I've just been locked in football mode, especially with work. Basketball's just not on my mind right now. So you'll need to carry these basketball conversations for a bit in the next few podcasts.
I'll do my best. So I think that Maryland's a little overrated, but I thought Maryland was overrated last year too. They ended up winning a lot of close games and getting blown out in their losses.
Yeah, Chris Collins even kind of called that out a little bit at Northwestern. Not called out, but he had mentioned, Maryland had this great record in games decided by 6 points or less, while we were like 0-6 or something like that. If we even just get half of those, our season looks different, and it's true. And it's kind of how the way things go sometimes. We don't mean it to take when you get like number one in luck. You don't mean it to like degrade what a team has accomplished. It's more about moving forward. You're not as confident in picking them. Like I didn't want to say Maryland was a fraud last year. I just thought it wasn't to take away from what they did. It's just when they got into the tournament or when they were in games, I wasn't very confident picking them, and that's kind of what it was. I think some people take that a little bit too far and say you're a fraud. Well, at the end of the day, the bottom line is winning, and you only play so many games. And if you win, you win. Celebrate when you win, but going forward, it doesn't mean we got to be confident in picking you.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody last year was arguing that Maryland was not a good team, then they were making a really hot take type argument at that point. But yeah, I mean, everybody was picking Maryland to win, and so from one perspective, I mean, Melo Trimble's going to be really good, and they're bringing in a pretty good recruiting class as well. Indiana is getting a big man in Thomas Bryant that should be a pretty huge help right from the get-go, and So Indiana is going to be a little bit more interesting this season. Purdue is going to be really interesting with Haas and Caleb Swanigan, who got cleared to play, as well as AJ Hammonds, all playing together somehow. And then Wisconsin is always going to be interesting, especially because I think Nigel Hayes is just going to be an absolute monster this year. I really like his game, but yeah. So, but that's kind of the gamut of Big Ten teams, and then Michigan should be better as well. Just having Karis LeVert healthy presumably will be a huge boost to them. I mean, Karis LeVert could be the best player in the Big Ten depending on how that all shakes out. So yeah, I mean, but it's just fun because last year it was kind of like everybody knew Wisconsin was the very best team, and it was just kind of like playing for second place. And this year it's significantly more wide open.
Yeah.
Everyone picked Maryland, but yeah, there's 5 or 6 teams that should be pretty competitive.
Yeah. And last basketball note, interesting comments from Travis Trice that to a Knicks blog that Miles Bridges was the best player on the floor when he was around MSU, and said he's a pro. So Travis Trice seemed very high, and Miles Bridges coming in for next season. So it's next year, but just thought it was an interesting comment. You got anything else you want to add? We've been here for a good while. Figure we'll wrap this up.
Nope, that's all I got.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys next week after the Maryland game, and if the Kansas game's on a Tuesday, we'll probably record this on a Wednesday. So,
yeah, that would make sense to me.
So maybe a day later next week. So, but I appreciate everybody listening. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Vanini. He's at JOBIN #2 and you can also follow at The Only Colors, where Joe says some things that he sometimes
that I regret later.
And also always subscribe on iTunes. You can try to subscribe in the RSS. I don't know why it doesn't work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know why. I'm sorry. So yeah, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will talk to you next week. See you.
See ya.